Hello! So today I'm continuing with my blogging series and this is part 2 of my photography tips. I'll leave the link to my first photography video in the description box. So today I'm going to talk you through my process for when I'm doing outfit photos, and I'm going to talk you through how I find a location, a bit of posing, and then editing. I never thought I was going to be doing outfit photos when I started my blog. Like, I was really awkward in front of the camera. I didn't even want to have myself on my blog when I started. I would just look vexed, like I looked a bit mad. And then gradually I became a bit more confident. I think as I started to go outside, I really liked shooting in natural light. I started to try different poses and play around. And now I just sort of go for my typical, smiley demeanor. So you'll see this. And I know, outfit photos may seem really weird to some people, but I just like to think, when I'm old, I'll have some really nice pictures to look back on. So let's talk about locations and shooting. So I'm a Londoner and I'm just very familiar with different areas of London, and there's just so much variety when it comes to architecture. So you've got the brutalist architecture of the Barbican, you've got the Victorian houses, you've got the Georgian houses, you've got grand buildings, the V&A, or you can go to East London where there's lots of graffiti. And there's just so much variety, and I just really like to play around with different backgrounds. I try and think about what I'm wearing. If I'm going for something a little bit more casual, I'll probably go somewhere with, cool graffiti. Yeah, I just really like to pair each outfit with a location. But similarly, if I'm just out and about, I'm just gonna find a brick wall. Don't underestimate a good brick wall. Or even a colourful house, like that can be handy, especially if you're wearing something quite plain. You're still adding a bit of interest to the photo. So I tend to do a lot of my location hunting on Instagram, and there's a lot of accounts, and sometimes they'll geotag the location, or you can try and go there and work it out. Key people I follow are Pretty Little London, there's also Pretty City London, Musings London, and then Bell and Bunty, and they are so good for colourful, vibrant locations. If you're not in London, that can also be an advantage, because you've got to think what makes your town unique. And I've been to Bath and there's all those beautiful Georgian houses. I think everyone goes to a certain crescent where it curves around and the background is just beautiful. I also follow Betty Magazine on Instagram, and she always finds like the cutest seaside towns in Kent. So if you see me in Deal, you'll know why. I've been asked about etiquette, and typically I just use my discretion. So if I'm shooting outside houses, I'm not going on their property. Maybe if I want to get on the steps, I would be very, very quick, but I tend to just be careful. I'll try to go to a side street that still looks nice, but I'm not going to get disturbed constantly. I think you just have to use your discretion, and there might be people who don't want to be in the photo. Like if they're in the background, they might be a bit funny about it. You don't want to be in someone's front garden, like at all. So I've only actually been told off once, and I was shooting from across the street, so I wasn't even on this lady's property, and she was not happy. But I think most people are fine. There's been people who've commented on my Instagram pictures of doors and they've said, that's my house. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so jealous. I think most people don't mind as long as you're being respectful. So with smaller shops, I just find if you ask them nicely and explain why you're taking the pictures, most of the time if you want to talk about them on your blog, that can be beneficial for them, and they're all for it. But it's always best to ask, especially if you're going into a small shop, because it's going to be quite obvious if you have your big camera. Some restaurants can be a bit funny. I think most people are always Instagramming their food, so people expect that. But maybe with a big camera, it can make, some people may look at you, but I just try to be quick and quite respectful, and I try not to get in anyone's way. So it may seem like every blogger has an Instagram husband, but things are very different behind the scenes. So with me, I actually just shoot with whoever I'm with that day. So once I had to get my mum to take pictures of me. She was wearing leather trousers and I got her to crouch because obviously I want to look a bit taller, and she couldn't get back up because those leather trousers, they're not really conducive for squats. Usually I'm shooting with bloggers who kind of know their way around the camera. If I'm shooting with someone like my mum, I just try and set up the shot first. I might take a picture of them and just say like, just replicate this, and they usually get it. Like sometimes people can't focus and I just say press and hold the button, don't press it all the way down. you'll hear a little whir, and that's when you take the picture. And normally they get it after, you know, a few tries. You know, try and explain the framing that you want, but if it's too wide, you can normally just crop. During the shooting process, I always just try and get more shots than I need. So I'll be taking hundreds, and sometimes it takes me a bit of time to warm up. So I might start off really stiff, and then I try a few different things. I'll go back and check, see what I like, see what's working, see what's not working. And then I sort of go back and adjust. And you know, I was so awkward when I started, and some of my friends are quite natural, like they can do any pose. There are some poses I'm fond of, you know, there's this weird tree pose I do. You kind of know what poses you like, and if you're having a day where you're like, oh my god, what am I doing? You can just do those and, you know, you'll look great. So now I'm going to talk about editing. So I switched to Lightroom about 2 years ago just because I found it was easier for organising batches of photos. So I am by no means a Lightroom expert, but I'm going to share the screen and show you my process. So I'm now in Lightroom, and the best thing about Lightroom is that instead of just opening your individual files, you actually import photos into catalogues. So I like to have one catalogue per month. This one is obviously called January, and it means I can just refer to photos easily if I need to access them. So what I've done is import some photos from my memory card. So all you would do is go to File, Import Photos and Video, and import a selection of what you want to edit. So these are all of my photos from last Tuesday. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to separate them further into a quick collection. So this is quite handy if you want to focus on a particular set of photos. So I'm going to select them all, then add them to quick collection. And then as you can see, if I toggle between quick collection and the rest of the photos, they're all there. So I'm going to edit, invert selection so I can look at them all. And this is just a great way of separating your photos out. So I'm usually in the develop section. So there's also library. This is the default setting when you import photos. So you can sort of view them all at a glance, which is quite handy to look at, you know, differences in editing. I've never gone into these parts. And as I said, this is just a very basic Lightroom tutorial, and it's how I edit. I'm not an expert, but I'm still learning. You know, I learn best by doing, and I think it's really handy to just play around with the program. I've already gone through my photos just for ease, but I'm just going to go through again and select a few more. So I will usually give them a 5-star rating if I really like them. So maybe we'll include that one. You know, I literally just go through, wait for them all to load, and you can see how many photos it takes me to get the right shot. Sometimes I'll zoom in just to see, you know, if my eyes are closed. So these are actually open. Oh gosh, that's quite close up. But yeah, I'm not going to use that one. So maybe use that one. That one's quite nice. So yeah, I just tend to import all of my favourite photos. You know, I'm not very discerning. Like, there are probably some people who go through pictures a lot quicker than me. So once I've finished my selection, I change it so I can see everything I've rated. So as you can see, everything I've given a 5-star rating to is here. Normally I will just go through and edit them as a whole. So I have some editing settings that I tend to use all the time. I basically will leave the exposure until later, because that tends to be quite variable. I up the contrast slightly. I move the highlights down. I move the shadows up. I move the whites down. I move the blacks up. And then I move the vibrance up slightly. And this is just like my default setting for all my photos that I tend to start off with. And it looks a bit strange, but we're not finished yet. I'll then go down to sharpening. I will up the amount to maybe like 52, 55, detail to around 45. And then I change the profile corrections. So, you know, because of the lens, you can end up with a bit of a vignette. So I always just make sure this is ticked. So I'd say I'm happy with that. So this is just the basic edit, and I'll just copy that across all the photos and sync. So I just like to make sure that all the things that you want are selected. So maybe I'm just going to select all of these. But I always tend to make sure that the crop isn't selected. So this is just quite handy. You know, if I'm syncing later on, I obviously don't want to sync the crop on, you know, on my photos, because it will cut bits off. So yeah, I'm going to synchronize everything, and everything and then invert selection, and everything has the same basic settings. So then this is when I would go through and look at the exposure. So I'm going to move the exposure up slightly, and yeah, so move the exposure up slightly. I've probably gone a bit too overboard on some of these other settings, so I'm going to move them down slightly, take the exposure back down, and sync them all again. So this is a great benefit of shooting in RAW. It just means, like, you know, if something's a bit too dark, you can just up the exposure. And I find that shooting in RAW, they do tend to look quite dull when you start off with anyway, so just don't be scared when you look back at them on the computer. I don't know whether to tweak the temperature. I think I was shooting these at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, so the light was starting to go, so it starts off, you know, quite warm, gets a bit bluer later on, so I might move this around. So as I mentioned in my other video, I don't tend to adjust the white balance when I'm shooting. I tend to just deal with it in Lightroom. So I've upped it slightly. I'm going to copy the settings across the photos which have been shot in a similar way. So I'm going to sync and then have a little look. So yeah, happy with those. I think this one was shot in a slightly different way, so I'm going to just change the exposure on that one manually, and maybe I might just copy across the temperature settings. So I'm going to sync that, I'm going to check none, and then just select white balance, and that will just sync one aspect of the edit. So I always like to check for consistency. This looks a little bit blown out, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't usually edit on this laptop, and you know, I have got some VSCO presets which I haven't been able to copy over and show you, but I would usually adjust the curve and I would have a lot more curve options. So these are some of the VSCO presets I was able to copy over, and the most handy thing about these is that you can look at their settings and what they do to get that effect. So I've gone on to this setting, you can see they've changed the luminance, the saturation and the hue, and then these are the basic settings for everything else. So this is basically where I got my basic settings from. Also, when you do use the VSCO presets, you do end up losing some of your sharpening and lens correction settings. I mean, that's been okay for now, but it's just good to check these things. It's a good way to see what you can tweak and the potential. But I'm going to go back because this is not the setting that I want to use. So I'm going to undo. I might add that curve to all the photos, so we'll do that. So I'm going to sync with these, uncheck white balance, tone curve. So I'm going to sync the tone curve. But yeah, my photos do normally look slightly different to this, and that's just because I use a different computer which has different curves and presets. So I'm going to sync the tone curve with all of them. Okay, invert selection. So yeah, I basically will just go through every photo and tweak the settings. So now this is starting to look a little bit bluer. So I'm going to up the exposure. I'm going to up the temperature slightly. I think that looks a bit better. You can always play with these again. You know, I like to, you know, depending on the setting, I might whack the highlights up if I want it to be really super light. Okay, so I'm happy with that, so I'm going to copy that across the similar photos. So we'll go for that. Synchronize, I'm going to check all, make sure I've got rid of crop and spot removal, and sync. Okay, so with these, I'm going to edit those separately again, so I'm going to up the exposure, maybe play around with the highlights. It depends if I really want to emphasize the colors or make it look super light, and, you know, if I want to make it look super light and a bit ethereal, I guess, like really dreamy. So I'm going to up that slightly. Might up the temperature slightly as well. So I think, yeah, it's quite subtle if you just do it point by point rather than just moving it with this. There's also tint, so if you really want to play around with the colours, I mean, I don't tend to do this, but you can also change the tint if that's, you know, something you want to, if that's an effect that you want to have. Another thing you can do is select a target neutral. So I would select the white and it will try and find the best white balance, but this can be a bit, you know, hit and miss. But I think, you know, I'll go with that for now. So I'm gonna copy this across all of these settings, synchronize, and just double check. So I think I'm happy with that. You know, if I go through and I find that there's a picture that I don't want, I can just remove it from the selection. So which one? If I want to get rid of this one, I'll just tap 0 and it's gone. But I can always get it back. So I'm going to undo that. And it's back. So what I can actually do, there's a spot removal tool. So if you go here, it takes you to the spot removal section. And what you can literally do, I can get rid of this peephole thing, spy hole, that's what you call it, not a peephole. If I zoom out, I can see that it's a bit like the clone stamp tool on Photoshop. So I've actually managed to get rid of that. I do find it a little bit temperamental though, because there are 2 different settings. So another thing you can do like a selective adjust. So say if I want to, lighten a certain area. So say I'm not happy with, the folds on my jumper. Okay, this is very extreme, but you can actually do that. You can adjust the feather, you can adjust the exposure, so you can make it really dark. You have to use this at your peril though, because it can look a bit unnatural, but you can just change the settings. So this is quite handy. Say if the sun is hitting my face in a particular way, I can adjust the shadows. So many different settings. I can also sharpen certain bits of the photo. So yeah, I'm going to only use this in very extreme situations. So I'm going to reset that because we don't want that setting. But yeah, I just thought I'd show you some of the, some of the options. Let's say I'm happy with those photos. I'm going to go through and I'm going to export them to a folder. So this is quite handy. So I tend to export all of the portrait photos first. So I'm going to get rid of anything that's landscape. And I'm going to go to File, Export. I'm going to create a special folder. So I've actually done a trial run of this. So I'm going to call this Tutorial, this folder. And I'm going to change the custom name. So I'm going to call it Tutorial. So you don't want to have, just untitled as your file name. It's quite handy for SEO to just make sure you're naming the photos. So I'm happy with that. I've selected short edge and I resized to 1000 pixels. So this just means that, it works really well with my blog layout. So I'm going to export those. Whilst I'm doing that, so I'm going to invert the selection so that I have all of my landscape photos selected. And then I'm going to export. So I've got all the same settings. I'm going to change it from short edge to long edge. I know that you can do width and height, but I just find that a little bit temperamental. And I just want to make sure my photos are the correct size. So I'm going to export those. So if I open up the tutorial folder, I can see that all the photos are exporting. So when they're done, you can just upload them to your blog or wherever you want to. And that's basically it. As I said before, I am no Lightroom expert. I'm still learning myself, but I'm hoping that these basics will just help you get started, just in case you're curious, because I just think it's such a great way of organising all your photos. So I hope you found this video useful. Feel free to ask any questions if I've left anything out. I know I've probably left loads out. So make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be continuing this series with a video about working with brands. And I might do another one with blogging dilemmas, so like motivating yourself or just these little things that happen that no one talks about. Maybe I'll do that. So if you want to watch my previous videos in my blogging series, I'll put them here. It'd be great if you could like, comment, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, all the things. Thank you for watching and I will see you very soon. Bye! Instagram brings all the bloggers to the yard and they're like, my shot's better than yours. Damn right, it's better than yours. I can teach you, but I'd have to charge per photo.